A powerful cattle baron enters a marriage of convenience with a mysterious veiled bride, never expecting the arrangement to shatter his carefully constructed world. What secrets lie beneath the veil that could transform his empire and his heart forever? A gunshot cracked through the morning air, sending a flock of startled birds into the sky. Harrison Montgomery lowered his smoking pistol, staring at the coiled rattlesnake he'd just killed on his front porch steps. The dead snake was a bad omen on today of all days. "Mighty fine shot, boss," called Hank, the stable boy who'd spotted the rattler first. "Nearly got your boot there." Harrison nodded curtly, handing the pistol to Hank. "Clear this mess before our guest arrives." The Texas sun beat down on Harrison's shoulders as he strode back into his massive ranch house. Coronado Ranch spread across the horizon like its own country, 50,000 acres won through 20 years of sweat, cunning, and sometimes blood. Cattle worth a fortune grazed on his land, watched over by cowboys who feared and respected him in equal measure. At 45, Harrison had everything a man could want, except someone to share it with. His first wife, Emily, had died in childbirth 10 years ago, taking their unborn son with her. Since then, Harrison had poured his grief into building his empire, becoming the most powerful cattle baron in 3 counties. He paused at the mirror in his entrance hall, straightening his expensive suit and adjusting his silk tie. The face that looked back at him was handsome despite the years, strong jaw, piercing blue eyes, and hair that had turned silver at the temples. Women in town still turned their heads when he passed, but Harrison had no interest in their flirtations. "Mr. Montgomery," his butler Stevens said, appearing silently as he always did. "The East Wing has been prepared for Miss Blackwood's arrival tomorrow, as you requested." Harrison's stomach tightened. "Has there been any further correspondence from Boston?" "No, sir. Only the telegram confirming her departure." Stevens hesitated. "If I may speak freely, sir." "Go on." "The staff is curious about the arrangement. There are rumors about the lady's appearance." Harrison turned sharply. "My arrangement with Miss Blackwood is a business matter, Stevens. Her father was my most valuable business partner before his death. This marriage secures my final connections to Boston society and the Eastern markets." "Of course, sir." Stevens bowed slightly. "Will you be taking dinner in your study?" "Yes. Bring the ledgers as well. I want to review the northern grazing contracts before Miss Blackwood arrives." Alone in his study that evening, Harrison poured himself a third whiskey and stared at the small photograph on his desk. Eleanor Blackwood's father looked out at him, a stern Boston businessman who'd helped finance Harrison's expansion years ago. Now Harrison would repay that debt by marrying the man's only daughter, a woman he'd never met and reportedly hadn't been seen in public without a heavy veil for years. "A monster bride for a monster," Harrison muttered, downing the whiskey. Miguel Hernandez, his ranch foreman and oldest friend, entered without knocking, the only person who dared such familiarity. "Talking to yourself again, Senor Harry?" Miguel asked, using the nickname from their days as young cowhands together. "That's never a good sign." Harrison gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you marry a woman you've never seen, Miguel?" Miguel sat, his weathered face thoughtful. "My Rosalita was chosen by my mother. I saw her only once before our wedding day. And if you'd heard she was—" Harrison searched for a delicate word. "Disfigured." "Ah." Miguel nodded, understanding. "The Boston lady's scars trouble you. They say she was in a terrible fire, that half her face melted like wax." Harrison poured another drink. "The perfect match for a man who burned his way to the top, wouldn't you say?" Miguel frowned. "That was 20 years ago, my friend. You were different then." "Was I?" Harrison stared into his glass. "Sometimes I wonder if I've changed at all." A knock interrupted them as Stevens entered with a stack of leather-bound ledgers. "The accounts you requested, sir. And a rider just delivered this." He held out another yellow telegram. Harrison broke the seal, reading quickly. His face hardened. "Miss Blackwood will arrive tomorrow, not the day after as planned. Her train is ahead of schedule." "Shall I inform the staff?" Stevens asked. "Yes. and have my best horse saddled in the morning. I'll meet her at the station myself." After Stevens departed, Miguel studied his old friend carefully. "You are worried about what you will see when she lifts her veil." Harrison walked to the window, staring out at his empire fading into darkness. "I'm worried about what she'll see when she looks at me." The next morning, Harrison rode toward town with a knot in his stomach that even the familiar rhythm of his stallion's hooves couldn't soothe. Dust clouds rose behind him on the dry road as he rehearsed his greeting to his future wife. What would she actually look like beneath that veil? Did it even matter? The marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. Eleanor Blackwood's Boston connections would open doors previously closed to him, finalizing his transformation from penniless cowhand to respected businessman. Her appearance was irrelevant. Then why couldn't he stop thinking about it? The train whistle pierced the air as Harrison reached the small station. The locomotive was already pulling in, belching black smoke into the clear Texas sky. Harrison dismounted, handing the reins to a boy before dusting off his suit and straightening his hat. His heart pounded against his ribs like it hadn't done since he was a young man facing his first gunfight. The train screeched to a halt. Passengers began disembarking, drummers with sample cases, a family with crying children, two ranchers Harrison knew with a nod. Then, at the far end of the platform, a slender figure in a traveling dress descended carefully, assisted by the conductor. Harrison's breath caught in his throat. Even from a distance, the heavy black veil covering her face was unmistakable. What kind of horrors lay beneath that dark curtain? And why, after all his planning and preparation, did he suddenly want to mount his horse and ride in the opposite direction? The train whistle shrieked once more as Harrison crossed the station platform with measured steps. His boots clicked against the wooden boards, each step bringing him closer to the veiled figure who now turned toward him. The curious eyes of townspeople followed his progress. Everyone had heard the cattle baron was getting a mail-order bride, and no one wanted to miss this moment. "Miss Blackwood." Harrison's voice came out steadier than he felt. The woman nodded, her face completely hidden behind a thick black veil that fell from her hat to well below her chin. "Mr. Montgomery, I presume." Her voice surprised him, clear and melodious, with a refined Boston accent that seemed out of place in this dusty Texas town. "Your journey was comfortable, I hope?" Harrison offered his arm awkwardly, aware of the stares surrounding them. "As comfortable as one might expect when traveling 2,000 miles to marry a stranger." There was a hint of dry humor in her tone that caught him off guard. Mrs. Peterson, the town gossip, bumped deliberately into a fruit display for a better look, sending apples rolling across the platform. Every pair of eyes fixed on Eleanor's veil, hungry for a glimpse of what lay beneath. "My horse is waiting," Harrison said tersely. "I've arranged for your trunks to follow by wagon." To his surprise, Eleanor laughed softly. "I hope you don't expect me to ride astride all the way to your ranch, Mr. Montgomery. Perhaps there's a carriage available?" Harrison frowned. He hadn't considered this. "Of course. Wait here." 20 minutes and a considerable payment later, Harrison had secured the hotel owner's covered buggy. He helped Eleanor up, careful not to touch her more than necessary, and took the reins himself. As they pulled away from town, the weight of questioning stares gradually lifted. "They're quite curious about me, aren't they?" Eleanor observed, adjusting her skirts. "People talk when there's nothing better to do," Harrison replied stiffly. "And what exactly have they been saying about me, Mr. Montgomery?" Harrison's hands tightened on the reins. "Nothing worth repeating. I've heard most of it before, I assure you." She turned slightly toward him, the veil moving with her motion. The monster bride, the melted face, the poor disfigured creature. Her directness startled him. "Miss Blackwood, please, let's be honest with each other from the beginning." She cut him off, her voice surprisingly firm. "You agreed to marry me for my father's business connections without ever seeing my face. I agreed to marry you to secure my future after my father's death left me with mounting debts. Neither of us harbors romantic illusions about this arrangement." The blunt assessment of their situation matched Harrison's own thoughts so precisely that he found himself momentarily speechless. "You're very forthright. Life has taught me the value of clarity." Her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. "Now, perhaps you might tell me about my new home?" For the next hour, as the buggy rolled through the scrubby Texas landscape, Harrison described Coronado Ranch, the cattle operations, the main house he'd expanded 3 times, the difficulties and triumphs of building his empire. Gradually, his discomfort eased as he spoke of things he understood. "And your first wife?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "I understand you were married before." The question jolted him back to awareness of the stranger beside him. "Emily. She died 10 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss." Harrison nodded curtly, unwilling to discuss Emily with this veiled woman who would soon take her place, at least in name. They crested a hill and Coronado Ranch spread before them. The sprawling main house with its east and west wings, bunkhouses, barns, corrals, and beyond, thousands of acres of grazing land dotted with cattle. "My goodness," Eleanor said softly. "It's like its own small kingdom, built from nothing." Harrison couldn't keep the pride from his voice. 20 years ago, I had only the clothes on my back and a single horse." Eleanor turned toward him, and though he couldn't see her expression, he sensed her studying him. "Your determination is admirable. My father always spoke highly of your ambition. Yet he never mentioned his daughter to me until his final illness." The words came out more accusingly than Harrison intended. A tense silence fell between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice cooler now. "My father and I had a complicated relationship after my mother's death and my accident. He found it easier to keep his business life separate from his damaged daughter." Harrison winced at her choice of words. As they approached the ranch, he saw the staff lined up outside as he'd instructed: Stevens the butler, Mrs. Winters the housekeeper, Miguel and the senior ranch hands, all dressed in their Sunday best despite the sweltering heat. "Your welcome committee awaits," Eleanor observed. "How kind of you to arrange such a reception." "It's only proper," Harrison replied, suddenly self-conscious about the display. He helped her down from the buggy, acutely aware of every pair of eyes fixed on Eleanor's veil. Miguel stepped forward, removing his hat. "Welcome to Coronado Ranch, señorita," he said warmly. "I am Miguel Hernandez, the foreman." "How do you do, Mr. Hernandez?" Eleanor extended her hand, which Miguel took with gentle respect. Harrison made the other introductions quickly, noting the barely concealed curiosity on every face. Mrs. Winters in particular seemed to be straining to see through the black barrier covering Eleanor's features. "Perhaps Miss Blackwood would like to rest after her journey," Harrison suggested, eager to escape the awkward spectacle. "Actually, I'd prefer tea," Eleanor countered. "The train dust has left me parched. And I'm sure your staff has questions they'd like answered." Harrison stiffened. "My staff knows better than to question my decisions. I meant questions about my preferences, arrangements for the wedding, that sort of thing." There was that hint of dry humor again. "Unless you've planned everything already?" Caught off guard once more, Harrison gestured toward the house. "Of course. Stevens, please arrange tea in the drawing room." As they walked up the path, Harrison tried to imagine the ranch through Eleanor's eyes, the massive oak door he'd imported from Spain, the marble flooring in the entryway, the expensive furnishings chosen to impress the cattle buyers and bankers who occasionally visited. Had he created a home or merely a monument to his success? In the drawing room, Eleanor removed her traveling gloves but kept her veil firmly in place as she accepted a cup of tea from Stevens. Her movements were graceful, refined, clearly those of a woman raised in society. "Our wedding is arranged for Saturday at the town church," Harrison said, taking a seat across from her. "Judge Williams will perform the ceremony." Eleanor nodded. "For days from now. That seems reasonable." She sipped tea somehow through her veil, a practiced movement that Harrison found himself watching with uncomfortable fascination. "I understand our arrangement is unusual," she continued, setting down her cup. "But I believe it can be advantageous for us both. You gain the Boston connections you desire, and I gain security. Yes, Harrison agreed, relieved by her businesslike approach. Your father was a valued associate. This union honors his memory and strengthens both our positions. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, the veil shifting with the movement. And what position exactly do you envision for me here, Mr. Montgomery? Am I to be merely a silent partner, or do you expect me to function as the mistress of this household? The question caught Harrison unprepared. He'd thought extensively about what Eleanor might look like beneath her veil, but had given little consideration to what she would actually do once she arrived. I suppose, he said slowly, that would depend on your inclinations. My inclinations, Eleanor repeated, a new edge to her voice, have rarely been consulted in matters concerning my life, but since you ask, I am educated, Mr. Montgomery. I read and speak 4 languages. I maintained my father's household and social calendar for years. I am not without skills. Harrison studied the veiled figure before him, feeling as though he was negotiating with a ghost. The ranch requires efficient management. If you wish to take on household responsibilities, I would welcome the assistance. How generous of you. The dry tone was unmistakable now. And the veil? Will that be a condition of our arrangement as well? The question hung in the air between them. Harrison cleared his throat. I would never presume to dictate your personal choices, Miss Blackwood. Yet you wonder, she said softly. Everyone wonders. It's the first thing they see, or rather don't see. She stood suddenly, moving to the window that overlooked the sprawling ranch. I hope you'll find me useful, Mr. Montgomery, despite what lies beneath this veil. And I hope I'll find something here that's been missing from my life in Boston. And what's that? Harrison asked, rising as well. Honesty, she replied simply. I've had quite enough of polite lies and whispered pity. As Stevens appeared to show Eleanor to her rooms in the East Wing, Harrison remained in the drawing room, turning his father's silver pocket watch over in his hands. The old timepiece had never kept proper time, running too fast or too slow, never quite in sync with the world around it. Much like this arrangement, Harrison thought, that suddenly felt far more complicated than the simple business transaction he had planned. A book crashed to the floor as Harrison entered his library after midnight, startling Eleanor, who stood at his shelves, her veiled figure outlined by moonlight. She spun around, caught in a private moment, and Harrison felt his heart jump. Not from fear, but from a strange new curiosity. I couldn't sleep, she explained quickly, bending to retrieve the fallen volume. Harrison stepped forward. Neither could I. For 5 days since Eleanor's arrival, they had circled each other like wary animals, sharing meals in stiff silence. The mysterious woman remained constantly hidden behind her black veil, yet somehow still managed to fill every room with her presence. You have so many books, she said, running her fingers along leather spines. Do you read them all? Harrison moved closer, noticing how the moonlight caught on the edges of her silhouette through the thin fabric. I buy them to look smart, he admitted with unexpected honesty. Most sit untouched. This one doesn't, Eleanor replied, holding up a worn copy of Emerson's essays. The pages are marked. Someone has loved this book. Emily did, Harrison said softly, the name of his dead wife feeling strange on his tongue after so long unspoken. She liked when I read aloud. Eleanor tilted her head, the gesture somehow expressive despite her hidden face. Would you read something? Now? The request hung between them, oddly intimate. Harrison hesitated, then reached for the book. Their fingers brushed, and a jolt ran through him that had nothing to do with the business arrangement that had brought them together. He cleared his throat and began reading words about nature and truth. His voice, rusty from giving only orders for so many years, grew stronger as Eleanor listened. When he finished, silence filled the room. You read beautifully, she finally said. The man I heard about in Boston would never read poetry. What did you hear? Harrison asked, suddenly needing to know. That Harrison Montgomery builds empires but crushes spirits. That he trades in cattle and cold deals with equal skill. She turned toward the window, her profile a mystery against the night sky. People love to whisper about successful men. Harrison felt oddly exposed, as if she had seen beneath his carefully tailored suits to something he thought well hidden. And what whispers followed you from Boston, Miss Blackwood? She touched her veil lightly. All my life, people have looked at me only to look away again. After the fire that killed my parents, the scars gave society one more reason to judge me worthless. Her words hit Harrison like a physical blow. Before he could respond, a terrible crash from outside shattered the moment. He rushed to the window to see a wagon overturned by the stables, men shouting in the darkness. "I must go," he said, already moving toward the door. "Of course," Eleanor replied. As Harrison ran into the night, rain beginning to fall around him, a strange thought followed him. Perhaps they were not so different after all, both hiding behind veils of their own making. Dawn found Harrison in his office reviewing cattle sale contracts, his mind drifting repeatedly to the previous night's encounter. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, expecting Stevens with his morning coffee. Instead, Eleanor appeared, still veiled but dressed for outdoors in a practical riding skirt. "Mr. Montgomery, I wonder if you might show me the ranch today?" Harrison blinked in surprise. "You ride?" "Since childhood," she replied. "Unless you feel it inappropriate for a lady to sit astride a horse?" Something in her tone, a gentle challenge, made Harrison smile for the first time since her arrival. "I'd never deny a good rider a worthy mount." An hour later, they galloped across the open grassland, Eleanor keeping pace easily despite her formal attire. Her veil fluttered behind her, secured tightly but dancing in the wind. Harrison found himself watching her more than the path ahead, amazed at how she handled the spirited mare he'd chosen for her, not the docile lady's mount Stevens had suggested. They stopped atop a rise overlooking the vastness of Coronado Ranch, cattle dotting the landscape like small moving shadows. Eleanor dismounted without assistance, stepping to the edge to take in the view. "It's beautiful," she said, breathless from the ride. "Like an ocean of grass." 20,000 acres, Harrison replied, pride warming his voice. "From that ridge line to the river bend 10 miles south." Eleanor turned toward him, her gloved hand gesturing to the workers visible in the distance. "And all these men answer to you?" "Every one," Harrison confirmed. 100 ranch hands, a dozen house staff. "Do they fear you or respect you?" she asked suddenly. The question caught Harrison off guard. "Is there a difference?" "All the difference in the world," Eleanor replied. She stepped closer, her veiled face tilted up toward his. "Fear builds walls. Respect builds legacies." Before Harrison could answer, gunshots rang out from the southern pasture. He grabbed Eleanor's arm instinctively, pulling her toward the horses. "Cattle rustlers, maybe. We need to get back." As they rode hard toward the ranch house, Eleanor keeping pace without complaint, Harrison found himself wondering what other surprises lurked behind that veil besides wisdom and horsemanship. They arrived to find Miguel waiting, rifle in hand. "Just warning shots, Senor Harry. Some of Carson's men testing our fence lines again." "Carson?" Eleanor asked, sliding from her horse with surprising grace. "Neighboring rancher," Harrison explained tightly. "He's been trying to push his boundaries into our land for years." Eleanor brushed dust from her riding skirt. Perhaps this disagreement could be settled with words rather than bullets? Harrison and Miguel exchanged startled glances. "Carson doesn't respond to words, Miss Blackwood," Harrison said. "Everyone responds to the right words," Eleanor countered, her voice carrying surprising authority. "Or have you tried all possible combinations?" As a dinner bell rang from the main house, Harrison found himself staring at his future wife with new eyes. The woman he'd expected to be merely decorative, possibly even embarrassing with her hidden face, was proving to be something altogether different. "You're not what I expected," he admitted as they walked together toward the house. Eleanor's laugh, soft beneath her veil, surprised him with its warmth. "Mr. Montgomery, I believe that makes two of us." Later that evening, as thunder rolled across the prairie sky, Harrison sat at his desk staring at a blank sheet of paper. The wedding was just 6 days away, and he realized he knew almost nothing about the woman who would become his wife. Yet somehow he was beginning to want to know everything. Lightning split the sky as Harrison stared at the calendar on his desk. 2 days until the wedding. Outside, dark clouds rolled across the prairie, matching the storm brewing inside him. How strange that his thoughts now circled not around Eleanor's hidden face, but around her quick mind and unexpected courage. The breakfast table rattled as thunder boomed overhead. Eleanor looked up from the newspaper, her veil moving slightly with each breath. "You're watching me again," she said quietly. Harrison shifted in his chair. "Forgive me. Mr. Montgomery, look at this," Eleanor interrupted, sliding the newspaper toward him. "The Carson Ranch advertisement claims water rights to North Creek. Your water." Harrison scowled. "Carson has coveted that creek for years. Your southern grasslands look eaten down to the dirt," Eleanor commented, buttering her toast with neat movements. "Have you thought about rotating your herds like they do in Vermont?" Harrison's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "You know ranching methods?" "My father believed girls should learn business," she replied. "Not common, but helpful. I've been studying your account books." "Those are private," Harrison snapped, surprised by this invasion. "They sat open on your desk," Eleanor answered calmly. "In 3 days I become your wife. Shouldn't I understand where our money comes from?" Harrison opened his mouth to argue when the door burst open. Miguel rushed in, his hat dripping rainwater onto the polished floor. "Señor, Carson's men are at the North Creek. They say we stole their water." Harrison jumped to his feet, chair scraping loudly. "That creek has always been ours. Get the men ready." He turned to Eleanor. "Excuse me, this needs handling. May I come with you?" she asked, standing smoothly. Harrison studied her veiled figure with disbelief. "This is men's business." "As you wish," she replied, her voice cooling. "Though my father once mentioned this dispute involves old Spanish land grants. I've seen similar papers in Boston." Harrison and Miguel exchanged surprised looks. "Perhaps," Harrison said slowly, "you could check our deed records while we talk to Carson's men?" As they mounted their horses in the driving rain, Miguel leaned toward Harrison. "She's not what you expected, Señor Harry?" Harrison pulled his hat lower against the downpour. "I'm no longer sure what I expected, old friend." Lightning flashed, illuminating the angry faces of Carson's cowboys gathered at the creek. Their leader, a burly man with a red beard, spat tobacco juice that mixed with the rain puddles. "This creek belongs to Carson now," he growled. "Your fancy papers don't matter out here." Harrison sat tall in his saddle, rain streaming down his face. "This land has been Coronado property for 15 years, Briggs." "Well, Mr. Carson says different," Briggs sneered. "And he's got 20 men who agree." Miguel's hand moved closer to his gun. Harrison noticed with alarm that Carson's men outnumbered them nearly 3-1. "We'll settle this legally," Harrison said firmly. "Not with bullets." Briggs laughed. Big words from a man with fewer guns. Another crack of lightning hit a nearby tree, sending horses skittering backward in panic. Harrison used the distraction to signal retreat. "This isn't finished," he called as they rode away. Mud splattered against the windows of Harrison's study as the storm intensified. Eleanor looked up from the desk where papers spread around her like fallen leaves. Her veil, damp from the humidity, clung more closely to her features, though still revealing nothing. "You're back sooner than I expected," she said as Harrison stomped in, dripping water onto the carpet. "Carson's men brought too many guns," he admitted, throwing his soaked hat onto a chair. "Did you find anything helpful?" Eleanor picked up a yellow document. "Look here. The original boundary follows the old creek bed, not where it flows now. The river changed course during the flood of 1871. Harrison moved behind her, leaning close to see the faded ink. The faint scent of lavender rose from her hair as he studied the maps. Their shoulders touched, and he felt an unexpected warmth spread through him. "This could stop a range war before it starts," He breathed, genuine admiration in his voice. Eleanor turned, their faces suddenly inches apart. Even through the veil, he felt her eyes meeting his. "Sometimes," she said softly, "what we think we see isn't the complete truth." The storm outside crashed against the windows, a violent boom of thunder rattling the glass. In that moment of shared victory, Harrison found himself reaching for her veil, drawn by an impulse he couldn't explain. Eleanor caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly firm. "Not yet," she whispered. "Our agreement was clear. You see my face only after we are married." Harrison pulled back, confusion and something like embarrassment washing over him. "I'm sorry." The front door slammed open before she could answer. Stevens stumbled in, rain dripping from his usually neat hair. "Mr. Montgomery, Carson's men have cut the south fence. They're driving cattle onto your best grazing land." Eleanor stood quickly, gathering the important papers. "It seems Mr. Carson prefers fighting to talking." Harrison grabbed his gun belt from the rack. "Bar the doors when I leave. No one enters until I return." As he rushed back into the howling storm, Harrison caught a final glimpse of Eleanor's veiled figure standing in the doorway. The lightning flashed behind her, creating a silhouette that somehow burned itself into his mind. Mysterious yet suddenly precious. Riding through mud that sucked at his horse's hooves, Harrison led 20 men toward the south pasture. Rain stung his face as Miguel pointed toward shadowy figures moving in the distance. "They've brought at least 30 head across already," Miguel shouted over the storm. Harrison pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "No killing unless they shoot first. We drive the cattle back and repair the fence." As they approached, gunfire suddenly erupted from behind a rocky outcropping. Harrison's men scattered for cover as bullets kicked up mud around them. "They're using our cattle as shields," Miguel yelled, ducking behind a boulder. Harrison's mind raced. A direct attack would risk both men and valuable stock. Carson had planned this well, knowing Harrison wouldn't risk shooting his own animals. "Split into 3 groups," Harrison ordered. "Miguel, take 5 men east. Thomas, go west with another 5. The rest with me up the middle. Warning shots only, we're herding, not hunting." The night exploded into chaos as horses charged through rain and mud, cowboys shouting commands that mixed with the thunder. Harrison's plan worked. Confused by attacks from multiple directions, Carson's men retreated, abandoning the stolen cattle. Hours later, soaked to the skin and splattered with mud, Harrison stumbled back into the ranch house. His hands bled from mending fences in the darkness, his body aching from being thrown when his horse slipped in the mud. To his surprise, Eleanor sat waiting in the parlor, a fire crackling in the hearth despite the late hour. A pot of coffee steamed on the side table. "You're hurt," she said, rising quickly when she saw his bleeding hands. "It's nothing," Harrison insisted, though he couldn't hide his wince. Eleanor ignored his protest, leading him to a chair by the fire. She poured water from a pitcher into a basin and knelt before him, taking his rough hands in her gloved ones. As she gently cleaned the cuts, Harrison watched her veiled face bent in concentration. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly. Eleanor looked up, the firelight playing across her veil. "Because you fought to protect what's ours." Something in the way she said "ours" made Harrison's chest tighten strangely. This woman he'd agreed to marry for business and social advancement now knelt before him, tending his wounds as if he mattered to her as a man, not merely as a signature on a contract. "Thank you," he said simply. As she wrapped a clean bandage around his palm, Eleanor's voice became serious. "Carson won't stop, will he?" "Not until he gets what he wants," Harrison admitted. "Or until he's convinced he can't have it. Then perhaps," Eleanor said thoughtfully, "we should give him something else instead." "What do you mean?" Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirts. "Every man wants something. Find out what Carson truly needs, and you might end this without more bloodshed." Harrison studied her veiled figure, backlit by the fire. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Blackwood." "Good," she replied, a smile evident in her voice if not visible on her hidden face. Life without surprises hardly seems worth the trouble. As she bid him good night and moved toward the stairs, Harrison remained by the fire, watching the flames dance. In 2 days, he would marry this woman and finally see her face. Yet somehow, that mystery now seemed less important than the others they might solve together. Church bells rang across the small town of Coronado Springs as Harrison tugged at his starched collar. Through the small window, he could see the dusty main street filling with curious onlookers. Everyone who mattered in 3 counties had come to witness Harrison Montgomery marry his mysterious veiled bride. "Cold feet, amigo?" Miguel asked, adjusting Harrison's tie with hands more accustomed to ropes and reins. "No," Harrison replied, surprised to discover it was true. "Just thinking." "About her face?" Miguel asked bluntly. Harrison shook his head. "Strangely, no. About her mind." Miguel smiled knowingly. "The heart sees what is invisible to the eye." The small church filled quickly. Ranchers in uncomfortable suits, merchants in their Sunday best, and society women whispering behind fans. All drawn by curiosity as much as respect. Harrison stood at the altar, scanning the crowd until the piano wheezed to life and heads turned toward the door. Eleanor entered on Judge William's arm, a vision in white. Her wedding dress shimmered in the colored light from stained glass windows, but all eyes fixed on the new white veil covering her face. As she glided down the aisle, Harrison felt his breath catch. Not from fear of what lay beneath that veil, but from the realization that it no longer mattered to him. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and promises. Harrison heard his own voice answer, "I will," as if from a distance. Then suddenly, the moment he had both dreaded and anticipated arrived. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher announced. The church fell silent as Harrison lifted the veil with hands that refused to tremble. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Harrison found himself staring not at a monster, but at a woman with striking eyes, high cheekbones, and yes, a web of scars that traced from her left temple down her cheek and neck, disappearing beneath her collar. The scarring was significant, but did nothing to diminish the quiet dignity in her expression or the fear in her eyes as she awaited his reaction. For one terrible moment, Harrison stood frozen, while Eleanor held his gaze with a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. Then Harrison did what neither he nor anyone else expected. He reached out, gently tracing one scar with his fingertip before leaning forward to place a tender kiss on her lips. "My wife," he said clearly, for those nearby to hear. "As brave as she is beautiful." The relief in Eleanor's eyes gave way to something warmer as she took his arm. Together they walked back down the aisle through whispers and stares that somehow seemed to matter less with each step. Outside the church, guests gathered to offer congratulations. Harrison felt Eleanor's grip tighten on his arm as curious eyes studied her now revealed face. She held herself with remarkable poise, meeting each gaze directly until people began to look beyond the scars to the woman herself. "Mrs. Montgomery," the banker's wife cooed. "What a lovely—" Her words died as a rider galloped wildly into the town square, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. "Fire!" the man shouted. "Fire at Coronado Ranch, the main house." Harrison's world tilted as he turned to see black smoke rising in the distance. All around them, wedding guests scattered in confusion. Eleanor's hand tightened on his arm. "Carson's revenge?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Harrison's jaw tightened. "Or fate's cruel joke. Either way, we must go." As they mounted horses provided by the livery, Eleanor gathered her wedding dress without hesitation, revealing riding boots beneath, a practical choice that, in that moment, struck Harrison as oddly moving. "I hope you don't mind if our wedding night begins with saving what's ours," she said, tying up her hair with practiced motions. "Ours?" Harrison repeated, the word feeling right on his tongue as they spurred their horses toward home. They arrived to find the eastern wing of the house already consumed by flames. Ranch hands formed a bucket line from the well, while others rushed to save ledgers and valuables from the main rooms. "Stevens! Miguel!" Harrison called, leaping from his horse. Miguel emerged from the smoke, face blackened. "Señor!" We saved most important things from the main floor. Was anyone inside? Eleanor asked, dismounting with surprising agility despite her wedding dress. All are safe, Miguel assured her, then hesitated. But there is something you should see. He led them behind the house where the fire had first started. There, beneath a broken window, lay a kerosene lamp and a crumpled note. Harrison picked it up, his expression darkening as he read. This was no accident. Carson? Eleanor asked, her scarred face now fully visible in the harsh light of the flames. No. Harrison handed her the note. This threatens both of us. Eleanor read aloud. A scarred woman brings a scarred fortune. The Montgomery Empire will fall as payment for sins of the father. She looked up. What does this mean? Harrison's face had gone ashen. It means someone knows things I've tried to forget. He turned to Miguel. Double the guards tonight. As darkness fell, the fire was finally contained, leaving the east wing destroyed but the main portion of the house salvageable. Harrison and Eleanor sat in his study, still in their wedding clothes, soot marring the fine fabrics. You need to tell me, Eleanor said quietly, her unveiled face now fully visible in the lamplight. The scarring seemed less pronounced somehow, as if Harrison's eyes were truly adjusting to see the woman rather than her marks. Harrison poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handing one to her. My rise wasn't always honorable, he said finally. Your father knew this. Tell me all of it, she said, meeting his gaze directly. Harrison sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. 20 years ago, I was desperate. The ranch I worked for was failing. Your father offered financing if I could secure water rights to the North properties. He took a long drink. The owner, a widow, refused to sell. There was a fire. She died. Eleanor's expression remained steady. Did you set it? No, Harrison said firmly. But I knew about the plan. I didn't stop it. And my father? Provided alibis. Used connections to ensure no questions were asked. Harrison couldn't meet her eyes. Your father was not the honorable businessman Boston believed. Nor am I the self-made success I've pretended to be. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, the only sound the distant creaking of the damaged house settling. Is that why you agreed to marry me? Guilt. Initially, Harrison admitted. But then you expected a monstrous face to match monstrous deeds. She finished, her voice tight with emotion. Eleanor, my scars came from trying to save my mother from our house fire, she said, rising to pace the room. I was 12. I've worn veils not from shame but because people see nothing else when they look at me. She turned to face him, her expression fierce. I agreed to marry you because my father's death left me with nothing but debts and whispers. I had few options. And now? Harrison asked, standing to face her. Now I find I've married a man haunted by the same element that marked me. She laughed without humor. Fire reveals truth, doesn't it? Burns away pretense. Harrison moved toward her, stopping when she held up a hand. I never saw your scars as monstrous. Not when I lifted your veil. And your sins? She challenged. Am I to accept those as easily? No, he said. But perhaps we can atone together. A knock interrupted them as Miguel entered, his expression grave. Senor, riders approaching. Many men. Harrison reached for his gun. Get the men ready. Wait, Eleanor said, placing her hand on his arm. This is your chance to face the past differently than you did 20 years ago. Their eyes met in a moment of understanding before Harrison nodded. We'll meet them together. The flickering light of 20 torches cut through the darkness as riders approached Coronado Ranch. Harrison and Eleanor stood side by side on the porch steps, an unlikely pair in their soot-stained wedding clothes. Behind them, ranch hands positioned themselves with rifles at the ready, awaiting their boss's command. The riders stopped 50 yards from the house. A single figure moved forward, a woman, silver-haired but straight-backed on her horse. Victoria Carson, Harrison muttered in recognition. You know her? Eleanor asked quietly. Carson's mother. and sister to the widow whose land I acquired after the fire. Victoria halted her horse. Even at a distance, the hatred in her eyes burned brighter than the torches her men carried. Montgomery, she called. 20 years is a long time to wait for justice. Harrison stepped forward, away from the protection of his men. This is private property, Victoria. Property built on my sister's grave, she replied, her voice carrying in the night air. I've waited for this day, when you finally had something to lose. Eleanor moved to stand beside Harrison. I'm Eleanor Montgomery, she said clearly. Whatever grievance you have with my husband, threatening our home with fire makes you no better than those you condemn. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she studied Eleanor's scarred face in the torchlight. So the rumors were true. How fitting that Montgomery shackled himself to damaged goods. Harrison's hands clenched into fists, but Eleanor spoke before he could. My scars came from trying to save someone I loved from flames, she said evenly. They remind me daily of both loss and survival. What do your actions today say about you, Mrs. Carson? Victoria seemed taken aback by Eleanor's directness. This isn't about you, girl. But it is, Eleanor insisted. You've made it about me by threatening my home on my wedding day. And now you must decide, is vengeance worth becoming what you despise? From her position at the front of the group, Victoria's face showed the first flicker of doubt. Behind her, several riders exchanged uncertain glances. Harrison stepped forward. Victoria, your sister's death has haunted me for 20 years. I didn't set that fire, but I didn't prevent it either. That failure has shaped every decision I've made since. Pretty words from a rich man, Victoria scoffed. Not words, Harrison countered. Action. He signaled to Miguel, who brought forward a leather portfolio. These are the deeds to the North water rights, the property that was your sister's. I'm returning them to your family, along with fair compensation for 20 years' use. Murmurs rippled through Victoria's men as she stared at the offered documents. Why now? She demanded, suspicion heavy in her voice. Harrison glanced at Eleanor. Because today I was reminded that we all wear veils of some kind. It's time I removed mine. Victoria dismounted slowly, her eyes never leaving Harrison's face as she approached. The torchlight cast dramatic shadows across the ranch yard, turning the scene into a painting of light and darkness. This doesn't bring Martha back, Victoria said, her voice catching slightly on her sister's name. No, Harrison agreed. Nothing can undo the past, but perhaps we can reshape the future. A tense silence fell as Victoria studied the portfolio in her hands. Finally, she spoke. This isn't forgiveness, Montgomery. I don't expect it to be, Harrison replied. But perhaps it can be a beginning. Victoria remounted her horse, tucking the documents into her saddlebag. We'll review these papers. She gestured to her men, who began to turn their horses. But don't think this ends our business completely. As the riders disappeared into the darkness, Eleanor's hand slipped into Harrison's. Her face in the dying firelight showed neither triumph nor fear, but a quiet understanding that moved him more than any flawless beauty ever could. You did the right thing, she said simply. We did, he corrected, looking back at the partially ruined house that somehow felt more like a home than it ever had before. Shall we see what remains of our wedding day? As they climbed the steps to the damaged house, Eleanor paused. Harrison, my things were in the East Wing. Everything I brought from Boston. We'll replace what was lost, he promised. She shook her head slightly. Not everything. My mother's locket was among my things. The only thing I have left of her. Without a word, Harrison reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver object, a tarnished locket on a thin chain. Stevens saved this, said it was on your dressing table. Eleanor's composure finally broke as she took the locket, tears streaming down her scarred cheek. Harrison gently wiped them away, seeing not the marks that once seemed so defining but the woman who had stood beside him with courage when he most needed it. The great hall of the house still stood largely undamaged, though smoke stained the ceiling and water from the bucket brigade soaked the carpets. As they entered, Harrison found himself surrounded by his ranch hands and house staff. "We stayed to clean up, boss," his foreman said. "Thought you and the missus shouldn't come home to this mess." "You should be with your families," Harrison began, but stopped when he saw what they had done. The dining table had been cleared and set with the unbroken china. Someone had gathered wildflowers from the prairie and arranged them in jars. A bottle of champagne, rescued from the cellar, sat in a bucket of well water. Eleanor moved forward, touching the makeshift decorations with wonder. "You did this for us?" "For you, Mrs. Montgomery," Stevens said with a formal bow that couldn't hide his smile. "Welcome home." As the staff filed out, leaving them to their improvised wedding supper, Harrison studied his bride in the candlelight. The scars that traced her cheek seemed to catch the golden light, turning what others saw as flaws into something almost luminous. "Not exactly the wedding night I promised you," he said, pulling out her chair. Eleanor smiled. A real smile that transformed her face and made Harrison wonder how he could have ever dreaded seeing it. "Better than I ever imagined," she replied. "This is real. The rest would have been pretend." Later, as they stood at the window of the undamaged West Wing bedroom, Harrison watched Eleanor unpin her hair. The simple, domestic gesture seemed impossibly intimate after the chaos of the day. "The Carson woman," Eleanor said quietly. "Will she accept your offer?" "Eventually," Harrison replied, coming to stand behind her. "Her pride won't let her appear too eager." Eleanor turned to face him, her expression serious. "And the past? Will it come back to haunt us again?" Harrison took her hands in his. "Undoubtedly. The past always does." He traced the edge of one scar with gentle fingers. "But perhaps now we can face it without veils between us." Eleanor leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I spent so many years hiding. I'm not sure I remember how to be seen." "Then we'll learn together," Harrison replied, drawing her closer. "The woman I married today is worth seeing clearly." Outside, the last embers of the fire died away as night settled fully over Coronado Ranch. The stars emerged one by one above the Texas plains, watching over a house where two people who had begun the day as strangers now stood together, unveiled at last. "Harrison!" Eleanor's voice cut through the darkness as she raced down the stairs, her nightdress billowing around her. The oil lamp in her hand cast wild shadows across the walls of their partially rebuilt home. Harrison bolted upright in his study chair, papers falling from his lap. 1 month into their marriage, and still he sometimes startled at the sound of his wife speaking his given name. "What is it?" he asked, reaching instinctively for his gun. "Listen," Eleanor whispered, setting down the lamp. In the sudden stillness they both heard it. Horses approaching, many of them, at a steady pace not meant for stealth. Harrison moved to the window, pushing back the heavy curtain. Moonlight glinted off metal rifle barrels. At least 15 riders were advancing on the ranch house. "Get my gun," he told Eleanor, "and wake Miguel." But Eleanor didn't move. Instead, she joined him at the window, her scarred face thoughtful in the lamplight. After their wedding day, she had put aside her veil forever, though she still wore high collars and kept her left side turned away from strangers. "They're not trying to hide," she observed. "Look how they come straight up the main drive." Harrison's fingers tightened on the windowsill. "Carson wouldn't dare attack openly." "Perhaps it's not Carson," Eleanor suggested. Before Harrison could respond, Miguel burst through the door, rifle in hand. "Senor, riders coming." "I see them," Harrison said. "Get the men ready." "Wait." Eleanor placed her hand on Harrison's arm. Lamplight caught the simple gold band on her finger, the ring he had placed there just 4 weeks earlier. "Let me see who it is first." Harrison hesitated, torn between protection and trust. "Eleanor, you once told me that an empire built on fear will always crumble," she reminded him. "Show me you believe that." Their eyes locked in silent communication, something that had grown between them since the wedding day when Harrison had shown the world he valued Eleanor beyond her scars. Finally, he nodded. "Miguel, 6 men only. No shooting unless I give the order." Eleanor squeezed his hand in silent thanks, then hurried upstairs to dress. 10 minutes later, Harrison and Eleanor stood side by side on the porch as the riders entered the ranch yard. Ranch hands with rifles stood guard in the shadows, ready to defend their employers if needed. The lead rider dismounted, a woman, silver-haired but straight-backed despite her years. Harrison's breath caught in recognition. "Victoria Carson," he said under his breath. "Carson's mother?" Eleanor asked, surprise evident in her voice. "And sister to Marie Wilton, the widow whose land I acquired 20 years ago." Victoria Carson approached the steps, her riding boots loud against the packed earth. She stopped at the bottom, looking up at them with eyes like flint. "Montgomery," she said, her voice carrying in the cool night air. "Mrs. Carson," Harrison replied stiffly. "This is private property." "Property built on my sister's grave," Victoria countered. "I've been patient, waiting 20 years for justice. When I heard you'd finally taken a wife, I decided the time had come." Eleanor stepped forward into the light, deliberately turning so her scarred face was fully visible. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, but to her credit, she didn't flinch. "I'm Eleanor Montgomery," she said clearly. "Whatever grievance you hold against my husband, bringing armed men to our home in the night makes you no better than those you condemn." Victoria's gaze hardened as she looked at Eleanor. "So the rumors about your face were true." Fitting that Montgomery shackled himself to damaged goods. Harrison's hand curled into a fist, but Eleanor spoke before he could. "My scars came from rushing into flames to save someone I loved," she said evenly. "They remind me daily of both terrible loss and the will to survive. What do your actions tonight say about you, Mrs. Carson?" For a moment, Victoria seemed taken aback by Eleanor's directness. "This isn't about you, girl." "But it is," Eleanor insisted. "You've made it about me by threatening the home I share with my husband. And now you must decide, is vengeance worth becoming what you despise?" Harrison moved to stand beside his wife. "Victoria, your sister's death has haunted me for 20 years, he admitted. "I didn't set that fire, but I didn't stop it either. That failure has shaped everything I've done since." "Pretty words from a rich man," Victoria scoffed. "Not words," Harrison countered. "Action." He turned to Miguel, who stepped forward with a leather portfolio. "These are the deeds to the North water rights, the property that belonged to your sister. I'm returning them to your family, along with fair payment for 20 years' use." Murmurs rippled through Victoria's men as she stared at the offered documents. "Why now?" she demanded. Harrison glanced at Eleanor, drawing strength from her presence. "Because I finally understood that we all hide behind veils of some kind. It was time I removed mine." Victoria dismounted slowly, never taking her eyes from Harrison's face. "This doesn't bring Marie back." "No," Harrison agreed. "Nothing can undo what's been done. But perhaps we can build something better going forward." The night air grew still as Victoria considered the papers Miguel held. Finally, she took the portfolio. "This isn't forgiveness, Montgomery." "I don't expect it to be," Harrison replied. "But perhaps it can be a beginning." Victoria hesitated, then signaled to her men. "We'll look these over. If they're what you claim." She left the sentence unfinished, mounting her horse and turning back down the drive, her men following in silent formation. As their horses disappeared into the darkness, Harrison felt Eleanor's hand slip into his. The moonlight touched her face, neither hiding nor emphasizing her scars, simply illuminating the woman who had somehow become essential to him. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "We did," he corrected, turning to look at their partially rebuilt home. Though still damaged from the fire, it somehow felt more like a true home than it ever had before. "Shall we see what else can be mended?" As they walked back inside, Eleanor suddenly stopped. "Harrison, I just remembered. My mother's locket was in my room when the fire started. Everything I brought from Boston." Without a word, Harrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tarnished silver locket. "Stevens found this in the ashes. Said it had fallen behind your dressing table." Eleanor's composure finally broke as she took the precious keepsake, tears streaming down her scarred cheek. Harrison gently wiped them away, no longer seeing the marks that had once seemed so important, but the woman who had stood beside him with courage and wisdom when he needed both. "I believe," he said softly, drawing her close, "that I finally see you clearly, Eleanor Montgomery." Her smile, unpracticed but genuine, warmed something long frozen within him as they walked arm in arm toward the future they would build together from the ashes of their pasts. The September sun bathed Coronado Ranch in golden light as Harrison Montgomery stood at his office window, watching Eleanor in the garden below. She knelt in the rich soil, directing the planting of late summer roses, her hat tilted to shade her face from curious eyes, a practical measure now rather than concealment. 3 seasons had passed since their wedding day. The ranch house stood fully restored, but with changes that reflected its new mistress. The east wing, once destroyed by fire, now housed a school for the children of ranch hands and neighboring farms. Eleanor's vision brought to life through Harrison's resources. "Mr. Carson's boy is here," Stevens announced from the doorway, interrupting Harrison's thoughts. Harrison nodded, straightening his vest. "Send him in." Young Thomas Carson entered with his hat clutched respectfully in his hands. At 22, he carried himself with the confidence of someone recently entrusted with important business. His resemblance to his grandmother Victoria unmistakable. "Mr. Montgomery, thank you for seeing me. You're here about the water management proposal?" Harrison asked, gesturing to the chairs by the fireplace, the same spot where he and Eleanor had faced their truths the night Victoria came calling. "Yes, sir. Grandmother has reviewed your offer. She believes it has merit." The door opened quietly as Eleanor entered from the garden, a few freshly cut roses in her hand. She nodded respectfully to Thomas but didn't interrupt, moving instead to arrange the flowers in a crystal vase, a gift from the ranch hands on her last birthday. The negotiation proceeded smoothly until Thomas hesitated over one particular item in the agreement. "This provision about education funding. My grandmother questions what schools have to do with water rights." "That was my addition," Eleanor said, joining the conversation as she placed the vase carefully on Harrison's desk. The roses filled the room with their sweet scent. "Your family's children deserve the same opportunities as any others in the region. Education reaches beyond old boundaries." Thomas studied her with undisguised curiosity, his eyes briefly noting her scars before meeting her steady gaze. "You're nothing like what they said, Mrs. Montgomery." "Few things are," she replied simply. "Or few people." After Thomas departed with the signed agreement, Harrison and Eleanor sat together on the wide veranda, watching the sunset paint the vast landscape in stripes of gold and amber. A comfortable silence stretched between them, the kind possible only between people who had seen each other's truths and chosen to stay. "I received a letter from Boston today," Eleanor said finally. "Mrs. Winthrop wrote to tell me I've been formally removed from the social register." Harrison took her hand. "Does that trouble you?" "Once it would have," she admitted. "Now it seems like news from another world." "Is this world enough?" Harrison asked, gesturing to the sprawling ranch around them. Eleanor turned to face him fully, letting the setting sun illuminate her features, both the smooth skin and the scarred, with the same golden light. "This world is more than enough because it's real. We've built something honest here, Harrison." He reached out, tracing the line of her cheek as he had first done at their wedding. "When I agreed to marry a woman I'd never seen, I thought I was accepting a burden. Instead, I found a partner who saw me more clearly than I saw myself." "We all wear veils of some kind," Eleanor said softly. "Some are just more visible than others." As darkness settled over Coronado Ranch, lights began to appear in the bunkhouses and the schoolhouse where tomorrow would bring new lessons. The empire Harrison had built had transformed into something more meaningful, a community founded on reconciliation rather than dominance. From the edge of the property, Victoria Carson observed the ranch house through her field glasses. The elderly woman sat straight in her saddle despite her years, her face unreadable as she watched the couple on the veranda. "Should we ride down, Grandma?" Thomas asked, reining his horse alongside hers after delivering the signed agreement. Victoria lowered the glasses slowly. No. Some fires should be allowed to burn themselves out. She turned her horse away. Besides, I've seen what I came to see. And what's that? Thomas asked. Victoria glanced back once more at the distant figures. A man facing his past instead of burying it. As darkness deepened over the Texas landscape, Harrison and Eleanor moved inside. The main parlor, once a showcase for Harrison's wealth designed to impress visitors, had been transformed into a comfortable space where ranch hands felt welcome at the monthly gatherings Eleanor had instituted. I've been thinking, Harrison said as they settled by the fire. The Carson Agreement opens possibilities for expanding our herds next year. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. And the new railway spur to Amarillo will make shipping easier. She smiled at his surprised expression. Yes, I read your correspondence. A wife should understand her husband's business. Harrison chuckled, reaching for her hand. Remember when I was shocked to find you looking at my ledgers? You called them private. Eleanor reminded him, laughing. Now your foreman brings the accounts to me when you're away. Miguel always was a smart man. Harrison's expression grew more serious. I've also been thinking about your suggestion to set aside land for the Comanche families who've been pushed off their traditional hunting grounds. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. You seemed against it last month. I've reconsidered, Harrison said. You were right. The land belongs to those who care for it, not just those who claim it. Eleanor moved to sit beside him on the sofa, resting her head against his shoulder. Do you know what I've learned in our year together? What's that? That worth isn't measured by what others see in us, but by what we have the courage to see in ourselves and in each other. Harrison's hand found hers, fingers intertwining as they had on that first chaotic day of their marriage. In his vest pocket, the silver watch that had belonged to his father kept steady time, another broken thing made whole. Outside their window, the Texas evening deepened into night, stars appearing one by one above the land that stretched beyond sight. Neither perfect nor unmarked, but honest and enduring, like the bond between two people who had discovered that some veils, once lifted, reveal not monsters but unexpected blessings. Spring 1890. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold as Harrison stood on the newly built observation tower at Coronado Ranch's highest point. Below him stretched a landscape transformed, not just by nature's renewal after winter, but by 5 years of purposeful change. You're up early, Eleanor's voice came from behind him. She climbed the last few steps of the tower, a small bundle wrapped in a blanket in her arms. I wanted to see the sunrise from here, Harrison replied, making room for her beside him. And you? James usually sleeps until the roosters crow. Eleanor smiled down at their 6-month-old son, his chubby face peaceful in sleep. He was restless. Sometimes only movement settles him. Together they watched the sun crest the horizon, illuminating the patchwork of prosperity below. Fields where Comanche farmers now planted crops between grazing lands. The expanded schoolhouse where children of all backgrounds learned together. The new railway spur connecting their community to markets far beyond Texas. Your father's watch arrived from the clockmaker yesterday, Eleanor said, nodding at Harrison's pocket. Does it keep time properly now? Harrison withdrew the silver timepiece, its case polished but still bearing the scratches of generations. Perfect time, though I've come to appreciate that some things shouldn't be rushed. Like us? Eleanor asked, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Harrison looked at his wife, the proud tilt of her chin, the intelligence in her eyes, the scars she no longer hid. Especially us. In the distance, riders appeared, ranch hands beginning their day, Carson men checking shared fences, Comanche scouts returning from hunting. The world Harrison had once tried to control through force and isolation now flourished through connection and mutual respect. Miguel says the spring muster will show our largest herd yet, Eleanor commented. And the school board approved your proposal for adding a library wing, Harrison replied. James stirred in his mother's arms, blinking up at them with curious eyes. Harrison gently touched his son's perfect, unblemished cheek, marveling at the miracle of new beginnings. "Sometimes I think about that day when Stevens brought your telegram," Harrison said quietly. "How close I came to refusing this arrangement out of fear and pride." Eleanor leaned against him, her strength a constant he'd come to rely on. "And I remember trembling behind my veil as I stepped off the stagecoach, certain you would send me away once you saw my face." "We were both hiding," Harrison acknowledged. "Me behind wealth and power, you behind fabric and shadow." "And now?" Eleanor asked, though she knew the answer. Harrison looked out over their domain, not his empire anymore, but their legacy. "Now we stand in the light." As the sun rose fully above the horizon, bathing them in golden warmth, Harrison Montgomery embraced his family on the tower they had built together, both literally and figuratively. Below them, the ranch bell rang, signaling the start of a new day in a community founded on seeing beyond appearances, beyond past mistakes, beyond the veils that once separated them from truth. Life would bring new challenges. It always did in this unforgiving land, but for the first time, Harrison faced the future not as a fortress guarding his possessions, but as a man standing proudly beside the woman who had taught him that true sight comes not from the eyes, but from the heart.